So hello everyone, and welcome to our spring Changemaker speaker series. Off to a great start. Today's event is focused on the clothing industry with a special focus into the supply chains that drive so-called fast fashion. My name is Kat Hand, and I'm a program coordinator within the Sustainability Institute. Today's event is hosted by UNH's Changemaker Collaborative, which is a unique collaboration between the UNH Sustainability Institute, the Paul College of Business and Economics, and the Carsey School of Public Policy, and offers opportunities for students from all of UNH's colleges. The collaborative supports and cultivates skilled, courageous, and confident leaders through real-world experiences, while also helping provide capacity to our community partners to advance their own sustainability initiatives and ultimately the region's sustainability efforts. For students in the audience today, we encourage you, students from all majors, to check out the suite of programs we offer, which allow you to get direct hands-on experiences in sustainability working alongside community partners. One such program is our Be Impact Clinic, which pairs students with companies looking to evaluate their impact, which is a 2-credit hands-on course offered through Paul. Your professors will be sharing information on how to get involved with the Sustainability Institute after today's event. And at the end of this event, there will be a slide for the I2 passport and attendance credit for your courses. For community members in the audience today, please reach out if you're interested in connecting with passionate and talented UNH students who, through our various programs, can help you meaningfully advance your own sustainability initiatives. Before we hear from today's speakers, a few words of thanks. We would like to thank our faculty colleagues, all of whom are bringing students to today's event as part of their courses. Welcome to each of you and to your students. We are pleased to partner with our colleagues at UNH to offer this event. In addition to the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics and the Carsey School of Public Policy, the UNH Sustainability Institute partners in the Changemaker Collaborative. We are also delighted to be partnering with the UNH Library. The Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizen Project at UNH's College of Liberal Arts has also been a consistent partner in help making these events possible. Lastly, we are also grateful for the partnership of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility to offer the event today to their members and others around the region interested in sustainable business. We host the Changemaker Speaker Series because we know the vital importance of shining a light both on innovative practices that are advancing sustainability in meaningful ways and on the people, the pioneers and thought leaders behind this work, allowing UNH students and the broader business community to connect with and learn from powerful role models for sustainability. Joining us in conversation today will be our moderator, Wendy Pothier, Associate Professor, Business and Economics Librarian at the UNH Library, and our panelists, Zack, Angelini, co-founder of Public Good Provisions and a UNH alum, Walt Bailey, who's the Senior Sales Director of North America Wholesale from Patagonia, Brian O'Connor, the Director of Sustainability and Global Compliance at L.L.Bean, and Colleen Vien, President and CEO at the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors. You can learn more about our speakers' impressive backgrounds on our website. Thank you to all of today's speakers for generously sharing your time and insights. And a quick reminder that we'll have plenty of time for Q&A from the audience and encourage you to be thinking of questions throughout today's talk. So, as today's panel joins me on stage, I wanted to set the stage with a few photos of what's happening right here on campus. As some of you know, each year UNH runs Trash to Treasure, which is a student-powered program coordinated by the Sustainability Institute. T2T, as we affectionately call it, collects unwanted items during move-out weekend each semester and then resells them to incoming students in the fall. So on the screen behind me, you'll see 3 photos. The right-hand photo shows Trash to Treasure collection of clothing and textiles from spring in a large shipping container filled to the brim. And I think you can even see a student in it to the right, which shows just the sheer size. On the bottom left is a photo of the sorting process during the summer, and on the top left is a photo of the clothing portion of the sales when students come back to campus. A large majority of the clothing donations are from fast fashion brands, many of which are, very unfortunately, unable to be sold due to poor quality. This is what we call an unintended consequence, or what economics call a negative externality, We all get cheap clothes, but the price point we pay doesn't reflect the true cost. Today, we'll be exploring some of these unintended consequences and some of the hidden costs on both people and the planet of fashion business models. It's crucial to recognize the stark reality depicted in these images. What we witness is not merely an isolated UNH campus phenomenon, but rather a microcosm of massive global issues that extends far beyond these walls. Fast fashion, characterized by its rapid production cycles, low prices, and disposable nature, has undeniably permeated our consumer culture. While affordable and trendy, it's also a heavy contributor to pollution, social injustice, and unsustainable consumption patterns. So I'll now turn it over to today's panel to hear from our industry experts.
It is? Okay, thank you. Sorry. There's no buttons. It's very fancy. We have a icebreaker question we'd like to pose to the audience before we get rolling, and that is, think about the last item that you purchased, item of clothing, and by a show of hands, did sustainability play a role in your decision-making process? So yes, the last item of clothing you bought. It's okay if you don't, all right? Get a little gauge on the room. Thank you. Before we dive into our questions, I think since we're here and there are so many students from various majors, if you could each share, what you studied in college to get to where you are now, that'd be great. We'll start with you, Zack.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name's Zack Angelini. I am a former UNH student. I studied environmental engineering during my undergrad and graduated in 2014, and then did grad school for civil engineering and graduated in 2016. And during my time, I started to had research and work experiences where I was starting to see that the environmental issues that we were either working to understand or fix were really coming from large industries, and got inspired to want to get in on the inside. And so ended up meeting Fiona Wilson and becoming involved with the Changemaker Collaborative, which placed me with an internship at Timberland on the sustainability team. I was super fortunate to have Colleen Vien on the panel here as my first boss and mentor in the corporate world, which just a tip for any students, finding yourself a great mentor can be hugely impactful for your career, so recommend that. In that role, I was there about 6 years, eventually led global sustainability, and was helping the company to understand their environmental impacts and find ways to build more sustainable supply chains. And for Timberland, a lot of their supply chains, a lot of their materials are natural materials, so their supply chains interact with agriculture. So I started to get really interested and passionate about regenerative agriculture and the solution that represented to really kind of move beyond sustainability from doing less harm to actually doing more good and helping to heal and restore the environment. And so I ended up branching off from Timberland and starting Public Good Provisions. The mission of Public Good Provisions is to build hyper-collaborative, regionalized, and regenerative supply chains, all in service of the public good. And so we work with global food and apparel brands, helping them to build new regenerative supply chains, which I'll explain more what that means in a bit. And we also help them to partner with each other across industries to scale those supply chains in a cost-effective way. So super happy to be on the panel and be back at UNH.
Thanks. Colleen?
Hi, everybody. Colleen Vien. I don't know if I want to share when I graduated. We'll just say early 90s. And I am a cheesehead. I'm from Wisconsin, so I went to UW-Milwaukee. My degree was in finance, undergrad degree was in finance. And I can remember graduating and knowing all of the things that somebody with a finance degree is supposed to do, and knowing that that is not at all what I wanted to do. And it was very frightening. But what I ended up luckily landing into was the world called environmental phase 1 site assessments. And so I would go around. Hello? So was I talking too loud? Hang on. Okay. All right, another embarrassing age-defying moment here. Raise of hands, who in the audience knows the movie Erin Brockovich? All right, for those of you who have not raised your hands, I highly recommend it. Anybody with their hand raised is going to say they highly recommend it. And that movie actually came out right when I was doing these environmental phase 1 site assessments. And so that movie epitomized what I was doing. I was able to take my financial acumen and turn it into a private investigator and understanding the black and the white and what's gray in between in terms of environmental compliance. And it opened up my eyes to how the very smallest actions of a business or a manufacturing site in particular can have ripple effects that can last for years. And that was the turning point for me in figuring out how I wanted to make a difference in the world. It went from environmental phase 1 site assessments to then more broadly environmental health and safety within the manufacturing experience, which then led me into the world of social compliance, which, for those of you who don't know that term, it's in essence treating workers right. So all of the ways that factories, managers, businesses, operations have an impact on the people, their number one asset, that's what social compliance is about. So it's looking for things like discrimination, not paying proper wages, not paying overtime, excessive working hours, child labor, forced labor. The list is long, but it's all about human rights. So that's what the essence of my career had turned into, and the work that I did primarily at Timberland before it became a broader sustainability role, and had the pleasure to have smart people working for me in that realm. Since then, since Timberland, I've now honored to have the opportunity to lead an organization that is aimed at professionalizing and instilling credibility behind the work that is done to audit factories and supply chains all over the world for human rights issues. You can imagine factories don't want to necessarily have somebody find out the truth about their operations and whether or not, and many of them do, have child labor or migrant workers who are forced to work there. There is harassment, discrimination, wage issues, hour issues. It's a long list. Factories don't want to have that known. So this industry is wrought with bribery and corruption. Auditors are showing up at factory doors and they're being paid a bribe to give them a passing grade so that they don't lose their supplier. Suppliers are even bribing auditors because they need to place their orders and the procurement people can't place the order if they don't pass. So it's wrought with corruption. So the Association for Social Compliance, Professional Social Compliance Auditors is kind of like the Bar Association for attorneys. We administrate an exam, a 3-part exam process where if an individual is interested in doing this job, which I highly recommend it, it's a rewarding and fascinating career, we will test your skills and your competency, not only your knowledge in what human rights laws are and what they expect, but also in the how. Being that private investigator and being that person that's able to build rapport and get workers to open up to them, and also get factory managers to trust them and to be open and transparent as well. So we test them on that. We give them a certification. We also have an ethics and disciplinary process. So on any given month, on average, we're receiving over 100 complaints from within the industry globally on ethics violations. And so we have a disciplinary board that investigates each one of those complaints and then has sanctions for those situations where it's proved to be true. So we are the association that is trying to elevate the credibility and the professionalism of social compliance auditing. So if anybody has any questions about that, we won't get into it in detail today, but I will stick around after.
Thank you, Colleen. Please, Brian,
All right.
go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian O'Connor. I have a bit of a winding path to this role. I was a liberal arts undergrad. I studied math up at Bates College in Maine. And since I liked math, I didn't know what else to do, so I got into finance. Similar to Colleen, I worked in financial auditing for about 1.5 years, and then at an investment firm in Boston for about 8 years doing stock and bond research. And while that was intellectually pretty interesting, it definitely left a bit of a gap in my soul. So I'd always wanted to work at L.L.Bean. My summer vacations were always camping in Acadia, and I just had an affinity for the state and the company and just how the company was run and the people that I had met who worked there. So it took about a year and a half of applying and banging on different opportunities, and finally got a job at L.L.Bean in the finance department about 18 years ago. And I've been lucky enough to have had many different opportunities within L.L.Bean. So I was in the financial planning area for about 8 years. I ran the strategic planning group for a couple of years, got to work in IT for a couple of years, and then around 2020, raised my hand and said, hey, I've developed this new interest in renewable energy. That's what I want to do. I want to get more into sustainability, and I think L.L.Bean should too. And it was just serendipitous that at the time, L.L.Bean was recognizing that we needed to professionalize our sustainability efforts. You know, sustainability had always been a part of the DNA, and everyone just kind of did the best that they could in their current roles, but that wasn't enough anymore as our business got more complex. So the company recognized that we wanted to have a role to kind of coordinate all of our sustainability efforts, both on the environmental and the social side, to get more impact. And it was, again, just fortunate for me that I got to be the one who takes the first full-time job at L.L.Bean to do that. I kind of joke a little bit that the role that I'm in now is to help translate the good intentions of smart people into real impact. So I am never the smartest one in the room when it comes to the technical knowledge in these different areas, but I bring the financial and planning discipline to say, all right, how do we make this actually work and get the right people in the room and move it forward with the cost-benefit analysis, the prioritization, and actually make it happen in the business where you can have a much bigger scale of an impact. So super lucky to have made my way through different roles at L.L.Bean to this role, and I'm psyched to be here.
Thank you. And Walt, please let us know a little bit about your background.
Sure. My name is Walt Bailey, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I have an undergraduate degree from Wake Forest University in North Carolina, which is where I grew up. And I'm looking out at an audience of people that were probably a lot like me when I was in undergrad, of not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, including when I graduated. So I studied history and wanted to teach, so I went through kind of all my teaching accreditation and kind of pulled the ripcord on that at the 11th hour because I just decided, for a variety of different reasons, the teaching wasn't for me. I grew up in a family where we spent a lot of time outside. I started to really explore things like backpacking and additional things beyond what my family did in my teenage years, and then certainly when I went to college. And my last full year of undergrad, I got a part-time job at an outdoor store that had recently opened in the town where I went to school. Had a lot of fun with that. I decided not to study or not to pursue teaching with my history degree. History, by the way, was the one thing I enjoyed. History. I still enjoy history. My 16-year-old daughter is here today in the front row, rolling her eyes because she kind of knows that. But I would say for me, history was the thing that I kind of liked the most, but it wasn't necessarily a passion for me. It was just kind of the thing I liked the most. So all of that to say is, I think what I took away from my experience in college is not a technical background that I apply day to day. I feel like what I took away from my experience in college is a lot of professors that helped me understand how to think and problem solve and see pictures in a more detailed way or in a more zoomed out way, which I feel like is kind of what I still do. Like Colleen, maybe I'm not going to share what year it was that I graduated from 1995, but it was not in this. It was prior to 2000, different millennia. So I've been at Patagonia for almost 25 years. I've held a bunch of different roles inside of the company, from an upstart company that we bought that was a whitewater kayaking company, which was a passion of mine years ago. I've been a sales rep for Patagonia in the kind of North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Virginia area, and I've held various different management roles in our wholesale business. I currently oversee our North American wholesale business, so that's all of our wholesale business in the United States and Canada, and our pro purchase business, so people that we're giving a lower price to that we think should get that and are influential in their sphere of whatever they do for work. And our group sales business, so where we're selling to other companies that we want wearing our products as like a work uniform. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'll turn it back over for some of the questions.
Great, thank you. As you can see, we have a wealth of information and backgrounds, a variety of backgrounds that everyone has come from. So we'll toss out a question, and I think we have a slide that goes with this question, perhaps. Somebody did their homework and brought it. What is a supply chain, and what does a supply chain look like in the apparel industry?
So I'll take this one. I will admit that I put this simplified slide together. This is one that we used at L.L.Bean. So in full disclosure, I've been at L.L.Bean 18 years, but most of those years were not on the product side. So when I got into the role that I'm in now, I was probably about where most folks were in terms of understanding the apparel supply chain. So we put this picture together that we can use across the company to make sure that everyone at least has a general understanding of, say, where does a t-shirt come from? And if you haven't had a chance to watch the Planet Money videos that are in the library for the pre-read, please do so. It does a great job explaining this. But at a super high level, the idea that you go all the way down to the farm and you have to understand where the raw material came from. We call that tier 4, so that we think about the supply chain in tiers. And then that raw material being processed into something like a yarn or other intermediate product, then ultimately into fabric in tier 2, and then finally at the tier 1 factory where it's made into the t-shirt. That fabric is cut and sewn into a t-shirt. At the bottom, you have a rough range of the estimated GHG emissions at each step of the way, and a couple of things that are worth calling out here. Only 9% in that tier 1, so typically L.L.Bean, our relationship is with those tier 1 factories. So those are the folks that we pay and we buy products from. That's less than 10% of the overall environmental impact of that product. So we don't have a lot of visibility up the supply chain. That's something that's changing over time, but that has traditionally been the case. I'll also say that different products are very different. So a pair of boots would look very different, and a water bottle would look very different in terms of the distribution of the environmental impact. But in most cases, it mostly is upstream of that finished good tier 1 vendor. So that's something to keep in mind. The other piece here too is that each of these tiers is very likely different companies, and they're very likely in different countries. So when you think about trying to understand your whole supply chain, you talk to your tier 1 supplier, but you don't even know who your tier 2 and 3 or 4 maybe are, and you have to understand, you talk with your tier 1, who are our tier 2s, who are you buying from? And then you find out your tier 2s, who are you buying from? So it's pretty complex when you think about the global impact of all the different folks and all the different materials and energy and chemistry and everything that goes into making a simple t-shirt. So overly simplified graphic, but just to give you a sense of the steps that go along the way and just how global it can be.
Thank you. I was wondering if Zack and Colleen, if you could each provide a perspective on fast fashion and sustainability, maybe a pro and con that might exist in the supply chains for fast fashion.
Yeah, so I think the pro of fast fashion is the affordability aspect of it and the ability for people to, I guess I'd say, express themselves through fashion in a variety of ways, having different clothes that allow them to do that. I would argue, and I think probably everyone on this panel would argue, that there's probably other much more fulfilling ways to get affordable clothes and express yourselves through things like thrifting and the treasure hunt of finding unique items of clothes in that way. Also, I guess a pro would be that it's calling attention to an issue of overconsumption. In terms of cons, I think it's going to be kind of everything we talk about on this panel, and there's obviously the pictures that we saw at the beginning of this and the waste associated with fast fashion, and even though clothes, you may donate your clothes at the end of their life. It's a very small percentage, I forget what it is, but very small percentage of clothes that actually end up getting reused. Most do end up going to landfill, often in other countries where there's less regulations on the environmental aspects of containing everything in that landfill. So a whole host of impacts there. The other piece of fast fashion, which is more related to the work that I do, is around when there's overconsumption, that means that you need to grow more and more materials. So that tier 4 that Brian was talking about, when you have to grow more and more materials, you're often needing to convert more and more pristine, beautiful landscapes into chemical-intensive agriculture. That's often how it works today. So that's another major negative impact.
Thank you. Colleen?
Yeah, from the human rights and social compliance side, there are pros and there are cons to fast fashion. A pro is going to be economic opportunity for people in developing countries that don't have a lot of opportunity. So having a lot of different brands that are producing and manufacturing goods in a very fast way is creating more economic opportunity for developing countries. So that is a pro. That said, it is often the fast fashion brands, and I can't say that carte blanche. It is not true amongst all, but for many fast fashion brands, they are only interested in the bottom line and are not investing in relationships with their suppliers, and therefore are not keeping a close watch on how those workers are being treated. So that is the flip side of it. Another pro is that there are many brands who do invest in long-term relationships with suppliers, that do invest in a monitoring program. And there are ways to find out who those organizations are. One of the recommendations that I give to mainstream consumers is to look at organizations, associations that responsible businesses would be members of. So a couple that come to mind, of course, locally here in our backyard is New Hampshire BSR. If they are a member of an organization that says they are an organization of businesses that look at social responsibility, they're only a member of an organization like that because they do care. They may not be perfect, but they are doing something and they want to at least learn more to do better. Other organizations on a more global scale, or at least national scale for the United States, is particularly with the apparel industry, would be the American Apparel and Footwear Association, AAFA. If you look at their list of members, you can have some sense of feel good that if I purchase goods from those companies, they're doing something, which is better than nothing. So that would be a pro.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate those perspectives and introduced a little bit into some supply chain terms like sourcing and suppliers. So I was wondering, Walt, if you could share with us a little bit of your perspective on how a fast fashion supply chain maybe works alternatively with slow fashion.
Yeah, sure. So I think maybe I don't need this one. So fast supply chains, we've kind of talked about it a little bit here so far, but I think kind of like just really simply put, a fast supply chain is what it sounds like. So it is fast from beginning to end. So when a company issues a purchase order to when it shows up in their warehouse, their distribution facilities, it is as fast as it gets, or on the faster end of how long it can take to produce something. So generally the companies that are wanting to use a fast supply chain, whether it's fast fashion or anything else, speed is the thing that they're really after. So a good example of this is think consumer goods, toilet paper, right? A company that's making toilet paper, they're probably making and producing a lot of it, they're distributing a lot of it, so they need a fast supply chain that is constantly churning, going into a distribution center and then going out to grocery stores and drugstores, wherever you buy your toilet paper. A slow supply chain is what it sounds like. It takes longer from when you issue your purchase orders to when you receive goods. That can be for a variety of different reasons. It may not mean that you have really high quality, really super responsible product. It could be cars, slow supply chain. There's speed, there's some companies that are slower or faster, but you can kind of start to wrap your head around some things are just complex to build and are in a slower supply chain. For Patagonia, we have a slower supply chain. We would actually like to have a faster supply chain, and we're constantly kind of working on that. But one real life example for us is, we have many of these, but one of them is a waterproof, breathable jacket or pants. So like we make a lot of those things. Some are insulated, some are not, some are rain jackets, some of them used for snow sports. On average, it takes about 180 days from when we issue a purchase order to when it shows up in a warehouse. And you think about the world that you live in and like, how long do you wait 180 days for something? Never. Literally never, I think, as a consumer. But that's kind of what it requires, from the sophistication of the raw materials that we're using, the laminates or waterproof breathable technologies, the assembling, fair trade factories, all the different things that we're doing. So Patagonia we have 2 design seasons a year. We have fall and winter that are one, spring and summer that are another. And fast fashion, if we're specifically going to talk about fast fashion, usually is every few weeks. So if you think about a company that maybe you like to shop at that is, kind of falls within fast fashion, they're probably introducing new products or new colors every 4, 6, 8 weeks. So it's constantly churning, and there's constant new product coming in. There's also constant product that they didn't sell from the last delivery that has to go somewhere. It's kind of a whole different story. But that's kind of the difference between slow and fast. The last thing I would say is fast is not inherently irresponsible, and slow is not inherently responsible. You can have responsibility at either speed. It's really about the choices that you're making as a business and the inputs of the raw materials and the fabrics and some of the things that Brian showed on his slide.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up with a question for Brian and Walt about some examples of sustainability considerations your companies are making when sourcing materials for your lines.
I can go first. So thinking about both sides of the coin, on the environmental side and the social side. So on the environmental side, we are a relatively small sustainability team at L.L.Bean, and our sourcing team covers a lot of different products. As you can imagine, L.L.Bean sells so many different things. So we really leverage industry standard organizations and certifications to help us validate that the materials that we're using are environmentally beneficial. So we don't have all the in-house expertise to evaluate those things, but we rely on places like the Textile Exchange, the AAFA, other places that help us certify and evaluate from a scientific perspective, are these materials really doing what they say they're going to do? It's very easy to fall for the shiny new object and hear a story about one benefit that could happen environmentally without seeing the full story that there may be some downside to it. So we really look to those organizations to help us understand the full picture environmentally, and then there's many industry standard tools that you can use to measure and gauge that performance. And then similarly on the social side, everything that Colleen mentioned, we do the same kind of work on our factories. So we will not buy from any suppliers that we have not audited ourselves. We have our own social compliance auditors on staff who go and visit each factory from which we buy. They interview employees, they interview management, they spend 2 or 3 days on the ground in these countries, in these factories, understanding the human rights perspective in that factory. And again, we won't buy from any place that hasn't passed our standards. And we're working that same process up the supply chain to their suppliers all the way up to the farm. So that process is going to take some time as we work up the supply chain, but a lot of it is on the environmental side, those industry standard certifications to make sure we understand the full range of environmental impacts. And the social side, we do that more ourselves on the ground at the factory level.
Thank you, Brian. Walt?
Can you repeat the question? Someone told me I need to hold the microphone closer to my mouth. And
You're doing great at that, by the way. My question was, what are some examples of sustainability considerations that your company makes when sourcing materials for your clothing lines?
Yeah, it's a pretty exhaustive list for us. I think where it really starts for us at a very base level, and it's simple to say, it's harder to do, is the product quality that we actually have at the end of the day. So a lot of what we're focused on at Patagonia is really not about how many things that we make and how much of it that we sell. We're really focused on how well does the garment actually work? How long will it last? How well does it solve the problem for which it's designed? And the answer to that is the answer to the question of how we will go off and design the product, test the product, and ultimately manufacture the product. So the way that we kind of think about quality, if you think about it through the lens of the discussion today, our products are built for years, not for seasons or for weeks. So the way that we make our choices with the inputs that we use is all in support of the quality and how well the product is going to last. Because if you have to throw that product away because it just didn't work or it didn't work for very long, if it's landfilled, it's going to be incinerated. If it's given to Goodwill or Salvation Army or something like that, and Zack mentioned this before, of all the things that are donated to Goodwill or Salvation Army, 6% are resold. 94% are incinerated. So there's kind of a major clog with that. And I'll get into some more specifics with some of the questions with some of these things that we do. But a couple of things that I would throw out just as kind of interesting to me, I think interesting stats that are kind of related to this topic, is the apparel industry is one of the dirtiest industries in the world. So it's responsible for 10% of carbon emissions in the world. So when you look at the slide that Brian had up here, there is a ton of carbon being emitted in the manufacturing, let alone what happens at end of life. In 2020, there were 50 billion units of apparel made. In 2000, there was 50 billion units. In 2020, it doubled to 100 billion units. The carbon emissions for apparel is going to grow almost 50% between 2024 and 2030. Most of the problem, not all of it, but most of it is here in the United States. So the average American buys 64 items of clothing a year. The average American throws away 80 pounds of clothing every year, all of which gets incinerated. The average American donates a lot to Goodwill or Salvation Army or whatever it may be. And like I said, 6% of that is resold. Every second of every day, the equivalent of one dump truck of apparel is incinerated somewhere in the world. Most of the apparel that's thrown away here, like Zack said, goes somewhere else in the world because our regulations don't allow for that stuff to be burned. So while we sit here today, I actually did this math ahead of time because unlike Brian and Colleen, I did not study math. The equivalent of 4,800 dump trucks of apparel will be incinerated while you're in this room today that were thrown away. So the scale of the problem is really significant. There are solutions, but the scale of the problem is big and it's worst. It is the worst in the United States.
Thank you. That's pretty heavy data, and I appreciate you doing the research and sharing that with us. Colleen, I'd like to come back to you for a second. Brian had mentioned a little bit about auditing and human rights, and I know that's the work that you're heavily involved in now. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about human rights issues related to fashion supply chains and manufacturing, both that we as consumers and maybe as future business leaders should be aware of.
So most of the codes of conduct, that's what brands will call their expectations that they set for suppliers. By and all, they are primarily based on what we know as the ILO, International Labor Organization's conventions and standards, while also adopted by the United Nations Human Rights Declaration. So it's all pretty consistent. It's not Timberland has one set, L.L.Bean has another. It's all pretty much the same thing. We want fair and humane treatment of workers. So that is in terms of emotional fair and well treatment. So discrimination, harassment, workplace violence, that's all no-no. In terms of physical well-being, so in terms of your safety in the workplace, as well as your exhaustion and fatigue, so being overworked and too many hours, having rest days, that's all a part of it as well. And then there is the financial rights and your privacy. So for instances primarily surrounding migrant workers, you're oftentimes asked to give your identification, your passports, your records, and they are held by the factory to ensure that you stay and you do your job. That's called forced labor. So that's a no-no. Child labor, another no-no. So there's, in essence, a list of like 12 to 13 different issues surrounding human rights, and that's just a variety of an example of them. I didn't list them all specifically. I would, if you haven't done your research about, and again, as Walt said, it's not fast fashion is bad necessarily, and it's not slow fashion is good necessarily. It is just the industry of almost everything. But fashion, because of fast fashion, I think, in these developing economic third world countries, there is that economic opportunity, and places that were intentionally initially built to be apartment buildings got turned into high-rise manufacturing locations. And so that's an unintended consequence of maybe fast fashion coming into a place that wasn't set up with the systems to accommodate that economic growth. If you haven't heard of it, it's called Rana Plaza, R-A-N-A Plaza. If you haven't heard of it, please Google, research it, look it up. It is the single most tragic instance in the fashion industry where over 1,000, I think it's almost 1,200 people died from a high-rise building that collapsed. In exactly that scenario that I described, it was not intended to be a manufacturing facility with 11 floors and equipment on the 11th floor. It wasn't structurally sound for that. So unintended consequences of fast fashion does happen, and it's more than necessarily just people treating people right. It's other circumstances to be considered.
Thank you. Zach, if we could for a moment switch to maybe a little bit different perspective on supply chain and sustainability, and talk a little bit about your work with regenerative, that is a difficult word to say in front of an audience, regenerative agriculture, and how it contributes to promoting more sustainable practices within the fashion industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So just back to that slide, this is going all the way further down those tiers of the supply chain to where the materials in your clothes are actually either extracted or grown. And for me, when I was first being introduced to the apparel industry, I don't think I realized how much of an interconnection there was between our clothes and apparel and agriculture. I feel like when I thought agriculture, I just thought food, the food industry. But a large amount of the materials in your clothes, like cotton, wool, leather, natural rubber, cashmere, there's a bunch, all come from agriculture. And today, the vast majority of those materials are grown through very chemical-intensive industrial agriculture that has lots of negative impacts globally. I think it's the second most impactful industry behind apparel, or third. And some of those impacts, like it's one of the top causes industrial agriculture is one of the top causes of climate change. It's the top cause of water pollution. It's also the top cause of soil degradation. So that was an issue I had not heard about until getting into this space. But the United Nations estimates that 70% of the world's soil has been degraded over just the last 40 years. And if that rate of soil degradation continues, that as a society, we only have 60 harvests left until there's not enough soil to produce the food that we need for our world population. Some really scary, stark issues there, and it's a little bit doom and gloom when you think about industrial agriculture, but the good news is that regenerative agriculture can really change all of that and flip the story of agriculture on its head from being the cause of these massive environmental problems to actually a solution to those very problems. So basically how it works is it's based on really ancient indigenous knowledge now combined with everything we know in Western science to work with nature and mimic natural processes on a farm, leveraging a variety of plants and animals and the symbiotic relationships between them to actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere where we obviously don't want it and store it in the soil where you actually do want carbon. When you have more carbon in your soil, you have healthier soil. That soil can hold water. It can just support more life in general, whether that be microbes or animals or humans that rely on that soil. So it's this really exciting win-win-win solution that really says that this is mission possible. A lot of what we've been talking about is a bit doom and gloom, but we actually have very real, powerful ways to not just be less bad. I think when I first started in sustainability, it was a little demoralizing that a lot of the work we were doing was like, okay, this is awful. How can we make it a little less bad? What was so exciting to me about regenerative agriculture is this is actually about making things better, healing, restoring, actually participating in the coming more alive of the world versus just degrading it less.
Thank you all. I realize we have so many great students here, and I don't want to be the only one asking questions to you. I'd love to open it up for a few minutes to our student audience and see what questions they have for you. We'll have a moment to come back, and everyone will have a closing thought afterwards. How about that? All right, so we've got a couple microphones. I think we have microphone runners. Looks like we have a question up front to start. So if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you.
It's nice meeting you all. In your careers, what is the most meaningful thing that you've done that helps contribute, like, your company's, like, great, like, steps towards promoting sustainability?
I can go first. My favorite project that I got to work on is actually, it was my answer to my last sustainable purchase, was these shoes that use rubber from farms in Thailand that are, so I guess to start, rubber can either be synthetic or it can be natural. Natural rubber is tapped in a liquid form, just like maple syrup is tapped from a maple tree. Liquid rubber is tapped from rubber trees. And rubber trees, just like I was kind of explaining with agriculture in general, can be grown in a really destructive way that clear cuts natural forests and degrades land. But we started a project in Thailand that was based on dynamic agroforestry. So it's a way of growing rubber trees in a way that mimics natural rainforests and brings life and abundance back to that land and restores degraded land. And so I got to visit one of those projects and integrate it into timberland during my time there, and just going there and seeing the difference, standing like side by side on a conventional rubber plantation, which is just like a monoculture of rubber trees that's kind of like devoid of any other life. And then you step into the regenerative agroforest, and it's just like buzzing with life and birds and bees and beauty. And just really cool to see that difference and to get that into the industry, and hopefully it continues to scale.
I can jump in next. I lead a sales team, right? So my part of the business that I work in Patagonia is not the supply chain. Nor is it giving the money away that we give away. But I think for me, I could kind of sit here for a couple hours probably and answer this question, but I'll try to keep it tight. We work as a community at Patagonia. Everybody that works at Patagonia is there because they want to be. I mean, we have a handful of people that it's just a job for them, but I mean, it is a handful. We have 3,600 employees. Everybody is motivated and everybody is rowing in the same direction. We might be yelling at each other while we're rowing. We often are. But that's out of passion. So I think for me, what it really kind of comes down to, I think, is just satisfaction. It's pride. I think I work for a company that we donated our company to the planet. So 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, the founder of Patagonia doesn't want anything to do with all of the money and the profit that the company has. We literally give all of our profit back to the planet. Last year, that was $71 million. And my team has a hand in that. I think one of the things that Patagonia gets a lot of recognition for in a lot of different ways. A lot of it's positive, not all of it is positive. But I think one of the things that we really we wrestle with every day is that none of it matters unless our business is actually successful. It doesn't matter. If it's just an experiment that fails, or if it's a business that actually doesn't produce a profit, nobody cares, particularly the people that may want to follow in our footsteps or that want to throw stones at the business model that we have. So my part of the organization works on actually making the money and selling the products, putting the products in the right places, and making enough, not too much and not too little. And it is rewarding, I think, to work at a place where you're working with a bunch of people who are really good at what they do and you have a shared passion. So that would be my response.
I'll jump in next. I think it's great to hear these two different answers because I think that's what I would say too is it's whatever talent and interest that you can bring to your organization, use that to have an impact. So Zack, with his engineering background, can do the things that he talked about. I wouldn't understand half of that. I couldn't sell anything to anybody. But my background in finance and planning, I was able to meet L.L.Bean's leadership where they were, where they wanted to do more, and they wanted to have a better impact, but they didn't know how. And my experience to date had been how to take different initiatives from an idea into tactical execution and get them over the finish line and see results. So I was able to meet them where they were, bridge that gap, and help us achieve a couple different initiatives across a different company, from packaging to some of the materials that we use in sourcing to renewable energy. I mean, it's a growing list. We've got a lot more to do. But I think the cool theme here is just kind of using whatever skills, talents, and interests that you have, plugging those into a bigger organization to have a bigger scale of an impact.
Okay, I'm gonna go really quick. I was fortunate to work for a brand like Timberland, similar to L.L.Bean, similar to Patagonia, brands who really care and really want to make a difference and do things better than normal. So that's great, but what I'm most proud of what I have done in my career is taking what we viewed as being better and influencing the industry at large. So not just working within your own little ecosystem, but thinking more broadly. I encourage you all to take that with you into your careers and know that you can have an impact that's beyond your day-to-day. One example would be, we talked about all these audits about human rights and what's happening at the factory, but what about what's happening outside the factory? And so we took our audit process to say it's not just good enough to have a good impact inside the four walls of your building. What are you doing to impact positively the community at large? And that has become an industry standard for those companies, like those at the table here, who say basic isn't good enough. I want to do something more. And that's become a more common industry standard now.
Thank you all. I think we have time for a couple more questions, so let's go ahead here into the middle.
Hi, guys. So my question is, given that polyester is the most widely used unnatural fabric in fast fashion, how can community partners address its environmental impact to reduce reliance on the unnatural fabric? Thank you.
That's a hard question. I'll build off of what Walt was talking about earlier. The best thing you can do from a sustainability perspective, in my perspective, is to have a product that works and meets its intended use. In a lot of cases, polyester is useful for the function of that item. So I think being careful where it is used and being thoughtful about the durability and the quality of the products in which it goes into is important. But it's a tricky one to think about, what do we do at the end of life for those items? And I don't have a great answer yet.
I would maybe add on to that. So polyester comes from oil, right? So it's petroleum based in its virgin form. Polyester and nylon are also infinitely recyclable. So they can be reused. There's energy required in cleaning, lots of different things that kind of get it back to a state where you can melt it and re-extrude it, but that is possible. So there is a circularity conversation to be had with polyester. I think the real answer, if you really want to get down to the bottom of the question, it's consumption. We're buying too much, pardon my French, we're buying too much shit, and we're making too much of it too. So whether it's polyester or it's not, polyester has more impact because the things that are made poorly, the things that are made super quick with the lowest possible cost, are made with virgin petroleum inputs. And that drives your cost down, but it also means you have maximum carbon emissions as you're manufacturing it. And then at the end of life of those garments, because they typically have a faster end of life, you may grow tired of them because they were trendy and you get rid of them, or they just wear out faster because they're more poorly made, then they get incinerated. So it's not an easy answer of just switching away to natural fibers or something else. That's part of it. That's something we're trying to do. We're just under half of what Patagonia makes is made from natural fibers. We would like for that to be probably closer to 2/3 and get rid of so much of polyester and nylons that we're using. But it is very available for anyone who is making something out of polyester to make it with 100% recycled materials. It is available to any company, anywhere, making anything out of polyester or nylon. It is a choice if they're not. It is a choice.
Thank you. I think we have a question over here on this side of the room.
Actually, building off part of the answer you just gave, what is the best way that you have found to encourage people to consume less or only consume what they need?
Great question.
I'll take a first pass, and I think it's a good one for others too. But I think the biggest thing is intentionality and thinking about anytime you buy something, what's going to happen to this when I'm done with it? You know, I've got a 8th grader and a 5th grader, and every time we buy something, and where's this going to go? Like, so great, even if you use it for a year or two, it's going to go somewhere, and is it going to be in a shape where it can be reused by somebody else, like L.L.Bean snow pants that get passed down from generation to generation, or is it going to get tossed? And I think just being really thoughtful and having that pause moment whenever you buy anything. Am I going to use this for a long time? Do I really need this? And where is it going to end up when I'm done with it? Because, you know, to Walt's point, you know, overconsumption is really what gets us into the pickle that we're in. And, you know, we can do a lot of good work around trying to minimizing the negative impact, but just buying less and being really thoughtful about it. So I'm having that pause, thinking about what's going to happen to this when I'm done.
I just add to, there's a quote I came across recently that I really love. And I feel like it kind of reframes the way we think about all of this. So it reads, I disagree with the environmentalist idea that we're going to have to make do with less. In reality, we're going to have to make do with more. More beauty, more community, more fulfillment, and more material objects that are fewer in number but richer in aesthetics. I feel like that just is a way to reframe how we're thinking about all of this, from like this scarcity mindset of like, oh, sustainability, like we need less stuff, we need to all suffer, to actually, no, this is about like more fulfillment, more beauty, a better life, actually.
I had a question. In the current state of the fashion industry, what material is currently the most sustainable? Like, what is the golden standard so far?
Zach, you look really excited. Why don't you take that?
I would say materials that are grown through regenerative agriculture. So like Patagonia sells products with regenerative organic certified cotton, the regenerative rubber that I mentioned in these shoes, things like that.
Can you bring a mic up here, please? Thank you.
Actually, I was just going to say linen, flax and linen, which we grew throughout the whole seacoast of New Hampshire, is a major one. Nope.
Okay, well, could you rephrase the question then if you guys heard?
She said she wanted to add a thought.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to mention, in particular to Zack, the processing of flax and linen, which was grown throughout New England and throughout the seacoast, is incredibly regenerative and a great circular production model. And we're growing some at Woodman Farm right here on campus.
That's very cool.
It looks like we have time for one more question. There's one here in the middle of the middle. Thank you all for being willing to ask questions to our panel, and our panel for being here.
So I know that one of the biggest incentives for mostly like college students shopping at fast fashion brands is the cost and like the low cost. Are there any plans to kind of close the gap between more sustainable clothing and like cheaper clothing? Because I know that often sustainable clothing isn't cheap. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll just speak to it from the perspective of regenerative agriculture. One of the reasons that I'm really excited and hopeful about regenerative agriculture is because there's actually the opportunity to lower costs through regenerative agriculture, because as you're building the health of soil, you're building that soil's natural ability to produce food, to actually resist pests, all of the things that farmers typically need really expensive chemical inputs or synthetic inputs for. And so over time, it's not going to happen right away, because anytime you're starting anything new, there's a higher cost because of efficiencies of scale. But over time, there's the potential for regeneratively grown materials to actually outperform conventional and be a lot more efficient and come in at a better cost.
I'll just add that when you break it down and it's the number of uses, so durability is so important, quality and durability. It may cost you more for that item, but you should be able to wear it more often. And coupled with that is, I want everybody to be annoyed with planned obsolescence, right? And that is not just in the world of technology, but also in the world of fashion. Like, stop telling me what I'm supposed to wear because that's what's the fashion this week. Like, think about who you are and choose those things that you know are timeless for your character, and choose good quality products. And stand proud for what you're wearing, not what is the latest and greatest on the shelf. That's just a mom talking.
We, in our household, we often say, cost per use. What's the cost per use on that item? Go ahead.
I mean, I would maybe jump into this too, Patagonia makes expensive products, and it's a super valid question. And I know, having been a college student years ago, I couldn't afford to buy Patagonia product. I ultimately could when I worked in an outdoor store because I got a discount on it. It is a tension, for sure. And it is a big question to which there are not simple or near-term answers. To me, I think where the answer lies in front of us. And I think what I mean by that is that if the consumer makes their desires really clear by what we're willing to purchase and what we're unwilling to purchase, companies will listen. They'll listen to talk less than they listen to actual action. So the companies that are getting support and getting favor for making good choices, winning and being more successful than those that don't, are going to matter. And so where I'm going with that is, the supply chains for doing things kind of from beginning to end more responsibly are going to get less expensive by more companies doing it that way. So there's more economies of scale. Right now, companies like Patagonia, with certain things that we're doing with how we're producing products, we might be the only company in the world doing it, or one of 10, or one of 20. The mills that are making a lot of the product, a lot of the fibers that we're using, or the fabrics that we're using, they might service, and many of them service thousands or tens of thousands of companies. So it's really about scale, and it's about consumer participation and it's about consumer participation or not. That fortunately or unfortunately, I think is going to drive a lot of the answers and where the path leads us. And you do have a voice. We all have a voice that we need to use.
I would just build on that. I think the collaboration in this industry will drive exactly what Walt was talking about in terms of lower costs as more volume of these materials and these practices are done. So voting with your wallet, I think exactly not just what you say you'll do, but what you'll actually do with your money and your purchases does get attention in corporate boardrooms and does drive change of behavior. So, and the more folks who start to line up behind that, the lower costs will be for everyone.
I was going to add too, I think there's ways to show your demand signal without buying anything as well. Not to sound like a social media marketer, but just liking if Patagonia has a super cool story about their organic materials, liking that, sharing that. Also, something I learned from Colleen in just being at Timberland was going on a company's website and just searching in the search bar, sustainable, regenerative, organic. That was a data point that in meetings would be brought up that, a lot of people are searching for this. We should probably have some offerings that meet this search need. So I think there's a bunch of ways to show that demand signal.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think we're about out of time, and we're going to turn it back over to Kat for some closing remarks and instruction. Thank you all. Thank you for your great questions.
I just want to echo the thanks that Wendy just gave. I think we could probably stand up here all day taking questions and hearing the conversation, since it is a very relevant topic. But I think also, hopefully, all of you are leaving here today thinking about that next purchase and the longevity of that. So we hope that all of you in the audience will join us for our next event, which is on Tuesday, May 12th. This event will be focused on what you can do with a career in sustainability. If you want to follow any of the paths of those up on stage. So if anyone needs credit, the slide up above is available to take a selfie with. And then if anyone needs I-2 passport credit, the code on the bottom right-hand side of the screen will allow you to take that credit. So thank you everyone for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.